Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, but nothing could have prepared me for the chaos that unfolded after my 17th birthday. My name is Alex, and I thought I had a pretty normal life, or as normal as it could be for someone who lost their mom at the age of 7. That tragedy left an infillable void in my heart, but little did I know, it also set the stage for one of the most dramatic chapters of my life. You see, my dad remarried a woman named Rachel not long after Mom passed away. She came with her daughter, Madison, who was about a year younger than me, and together they became part of our new family. To top it off, they later had Jake, my half-brother, who's now 5 years old. On paper, we were your typical blended family, messy, complicated, and occasionally loving. But beneath the surface, tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Everything changed last year when my grandparents' mom's parents sat me down for what felt like the most serious conversation of my life. They revealed a secret so monumental that it made my head spin. I was going to inherit between $500,000 and $1 million once I turned 18. The money came from a trust fund meticulously set up by my mom before she died, with additional contributions from my grandparents over the years. Their goal? To ensure I'd never struggle financially, no matter what happened. At first, I didn't know how to process this news. Sure, the idea of having that kind of cash seemed surreal, almost too good to be true. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing anxiety building inside me. Why? Because my grandparents warned me not to tell my dad or Rachel about the inheritance. Apparently, neither of them knew the full extent of the trust fund's value, and keeping it under wraps was crucial. As soon as those words left my grandpa's mouth, my stomach churned. What if they found out? Would they try to take it from me? These questions haunted me day and night, turning every mundane moment into a ticking time bomb. The pressure hit me like a freight train. One evening, while lying in bed, I drifted into a nightmare so vivid it felt real. In the dream, my dad and Rachel confronted me in the living room, their faces twisted with anger and betrayal. "You're selfish," Rachel screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "How dare you keep all that money for yourself?" My dad stood silently beside her, his expression cold and distant, as though he no longer recognized me. Then, without warning, they grabbed my belongings and threw them onto the front lawn, yelling that I wasn't welcome in their house anymore. The final blow came when Madison appeared, tears streaming down her face, accusing me of ruining her dreams of going to college. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. For hours, I stared at the ceiling, unable to shake the fear that this nightmare might actually come true. It wasn't just about the money, it was about losing the fragile sense of family I still clung to. As days turned into weeks, I began noticing subtle changes in the dynamics at home. Conversations grew strained, glances lingered longer than necessary, and there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. I couldn't help but wonder if my dad or Rachel suspected something. Were they watching me more closely, testing me? The paranoia consumed me, making even the simplest interactions feel like interrogations. Every casual question about my future plans felt loaded, as if they were probing for clues about the trust fund. I started avoiding family dinners, retreating to my room whenever possible, just to escape the suffocating atmosphere. Deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out, and when it did, everything would change forever. The moment I casually mentioned the trust fund during a mundane family dinner, everything changed. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just an offhand comment about how I'd have some financial security once I turned 18, but as soon as the words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted like a storm cloud rolling in. My dad froze mid-bite, his fork hovering awkwardly above his plate, while Rachel's eyes widened with a mix of shock and disbelief. For a split second, no one said anything, but the silence spoke volumes. I could feel their stares boring into me, each glance heavier than the last. That night marked the beginning of what would become one of the most suffocating periods of my life. A few days later, they called for a family meeting. At first, I thought it was just another routine discussion about chores or school plans, something trivial that would pass without much thought. But when I walked into the living room, the scene before me sent chills down my spine. The coffee table was cleared except for a single notepad and pen, as if this were some formal business negotiation. My dad sat stiffly on the couch, his jaw clenched, while Rachel perched beside him, her posture nervingly rigid. Madison leaned against the wall, arms crossed, looking at me with an expression that bordered between curiosity and resentment. Even little Jake, who usually ran around laughing, was unusually quiet, sitting cross-legged on the floor clutching a toy car like it was his lifeline. Rachel started the conversation, her voice trembling slightly, though I suspected it was more for dramatic effect than genuine emotion. "Alex," she began, leaning forward as if to close the distance between us, "we need to talk about something important. Something that affects all of us." Her tone was calm, almost soothing, but there was an underlying sharpness that made my stomach churn. She went on to explain how the money could transform our lives, how Madison's dream of attending law school could finally come true, how Jake's future education could be secured, and how relieved she and my dad would feel knowing their children were taken care of. Then came the guilt trip. Rachel's voice cracked as she spoke, tears welling up in her eyes. "If you don't help them, Alex, I'll feel like I've failed as a mother. How can I look at Madison and tell her she can't pursue her dreams because we couldn't afford it? And Jake, he's only 5. What kind of future will he have if we can't give him the opportunities he deserves?" Her words hung in the air like daggers, piercing through any semblance of logic or reason. She wasn't just asking. She was manipulating, using every emotional tactic in the book to make me feel like the villain. My dad remained eerily silent throughout most of the conversation, but his silence was deafening. Every now and then, he'd glance at me, his eyes heavy with accusation, as if silently saying, "How could you do this to your own family?" It was infuriating yet heartbreaking all at once. Here was the man who raised me, who claimed to love me, now sitting idle by while Rachel twisted the narrative to paint me as selfish and ungrateful. I wanted to scream, to remind them that this money wasn't theirs, it belonged to me, set aside by my mom and grandparents to protect me from situations exactly like this. But the weight of their combined stares kept me rooted to my seat, my throat tightening with every passing second. Madison chimed in next, her tone laced with bitterness. "You're going to have so much money, Alex, more than you'll ever need. Why can't you share even a little bit? Do you really think it's fair to keep it all for yourself?" Her words stung, not because they held any truth, but because they revealed how entitled she felt. To her, my inheritance wasn't a gift meant for me, it was a resource to be divided among everyone else. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to suppress the anger bubbling inside me. This wasn't about fairness, it was about greed, plain and simple. As the meeting dragged on, the tension escalated to unbearable levels. Rachel grew increasingly desperate, her earlier composure crumbling as she realized I wasn't budging. "Alex, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Think about what this could mean for your siblings, for your family. Is holding on to this money really worth losing everything we've built together?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. Was she seriously implying that refusing to hand over my inheritance equated to destroying our family? The audacity of her statement left me speechless. By the time the meeting ended, I felt emotionally drained, as if I'd been put through a trial without a chance to defend myself. They hadn't listened to a word I said, hadn't acknowledged the fact that this money represented my mom's final act of love and protection. Instead, they saw it as a solution to their problems, a way to absolve themselves of responsibility. As I retreated to my room that night, I replayed the conversation in my head, searching for a way out of this nightmare, but deep down, I knew there was none. This battle wasn't just about money, it was about control, loyalty, and the lengths people would go to get what they wanted. The tension in the house had reached a boiling point, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Just when I thought Rachel and my dad had exhausted every tactic to pressure me into giving up my inheritance, they pulled out their biggest weapon yet, a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, mind you, but one of the most notorious figures in family disputes, a man known in legal circles as the Trust Terminator. His reputation preceded him. He was infamous for dismantling trust funds and exploiting loopholes that no one else could find. When Rachel announced that she'd hired him, my stomach dropped like a stone. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was war. The day of the meeting arrived, and the atmosphere in our living room felt suffocating. The coffee table was cluttered with papers, folders, and pens, making it look more like a courtroom than a family gathering. My dad sat stiffly on the couch, his arms crossed, while Rachel perched beside him, her lips curled into a smug smile that made my skin crawl. Madison lingered near the doorway, pretending to scroll through her phone but clearly eavesdropping. Even little Jake, who usually ran around laughing, was eerily quiet, clutching his toy car like it was some kind of shield against the storm brewing around him. And then there was him, the lawyer. He walked in wearing an impeccably tailored suit, his presence commanding attention without saying a word. His name was Mr. Grayson, and if his icy demeanor didn't intimidate you, his piercing gaze certainly would. Rachel introduced him with an air of triumph, as though hiring this man was the ultimate proof of her righteousness. "Alex," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we've brought Mr. Grayson here today because we want to make sure everything is handled fairly. We're all family, after all, and we need to work together to honor your mom's wishes." Her words were laced with hypocrisy, and I clenched my fists under the table to keep from snapping at her right then and there. Fair, honor my mom's wishes. This wasn't about fairness or honoring anyone, it was about greed, plain and simple. Mr. Grayson took over from there, his tone calm but calculated, each word landing like a hammer blow. "I understand that you're set to inherit a significant sum of money upon turning 18, he said, flipping open a folder filled with documents. "However, based on conversations with your father and stepmother, it seems there may be concerns regarding whether this arrangement aligns with the original intent of the trust fund." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the bombshell. "If you refuse to voluntarily share these assets with your siblings, your father and stepmother are considering taking legal action against you. They believe that withholding such resources goes against the spirit of familial responsibility." My heart stopped. Legal action against me for refusing to give away money that wasn't theirs to begin with. The absurdity of it hit me like a freight train, but beneath the outrage was a wave of panic. I knew the trust fund was airtight, my grandparents had ensured that, but hearing those words still sent chills down my spine. What if they found something? What if they twisted the law enough to force me into compliance? The thought of being dragged into court, of having strangers judge my life and my decisions, left me reeling. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of headlines: "Teenager sued by own family over inheritance dispute." It sounded like the plot of a bad soap opera, but it was my reality, or at least, it threatened to become so. The days following the meeting were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I replayed every interaction with Mr. Grayson in my head, dissecting his words for hidden threats. Did he really think they had a case? Was he bluffing? Or was he genuinely confident in their chances? I called my grandparents immediately after the meeting, my voice trembling as I recounted what had happened. To their credit, they remained calm, assuring me that the trust fund was unbreakable. "Don't let them rattle you, Alex," my grandpa said firmly. "This isn't about the law, it's about intimidation. They're trying to scare you into submission." But knowing the trust fund was secure didn't stop the fear from creeping in. At school, I found myself zoning out during class, unable to focus on anything except the looming threat of litigation. Friends noticed my distraction, asking if everything was okay, but how could I explain something so surreal? How could I tell them that my own family was willing to sue me over money that belonged solely to me? The isolation weighed heavily on me, and for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to feel trapped not by physical walls, but by circumstances beyond my control. To make matters worse, Rachel doubled down on her campaign of manipulation. She started leaving passive-aggressive notes around the house, reminding me of family values and shared responsibility. One evening, I found a magazine article about estranged families torn apart by inheritance disputes tucked under my bedroom door. The message was clear: if I didn't comply, I risked losing not just the money, but any semblance of a relationship with my dad and stepfamily. It was psychological warfare, and I was caught in the crossfire. Despite the chaos, I refused to back down. Deep down, I knew this fight wasn't just about money, it was about standing up for what my mom had intended for me. She hadn't worked tirelessly alongside my grandparents to create this trust fund only for it to be dismantled by people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM. Every sleepless night, every pang of doubt, only strengthened my resolve. If they wanted a battle, I was ready to fight and win. The tension in the house had been simmering for weeks, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened during what was supposed to be a normal family dinner. It started off like any other evening. Jake was playing with his action figures under the table, Madison scrolled through her phone while picking at her food, and Rachel hummed softly as she served mashed potatoes onto everyone's plates. My dad sat at the head of the table, and usually quiet, his eyes darting between me and Rachel as though he were bracing himself for something. I tried to focus on my plate, avoiding eye contact with anyone, but I could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on me. It wasn't long before the facade of normalcy shattered. Rachel cleared her throat loudly, setting down her fork with deliberate force. "You know," she began, her voice deceptively calm but laced with an edge that made my skin prickle, "we've all been trying really hard to understand where Alex is coming from. But honestly, it's getting harder every day." She paused, letting her words hang in the air like storm clouds ready to burst. "I mean, how can someone sit here knowing they have more than enough money to help their own siblings and yet refuse to lift a finger?" Before I could respond, Madison chimed in, her tone sharp and accusatory. "Yeah, Alex," she spat, leaning forward so her elbows rested on the table. "How do you live with yourself? You're sitting on a fortune, and meanwhile, Jake might not even get to go to college because we can't afford it. And me, forget about law school unless some miracle happens. Do you really think this is fair?" Her voice rose with each sentence, until she was practically shouting. "You're selfish, Alex. No, worse, you're pathetic. How dare you keep all that money when you know we need it?" The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in as Madison's words echoed in my ears. Jake looked up from his toys, confusion etched across his face. "What's going on?" he asked innocently, his big brown eyes wide with curiosity. Rachel seized the moment, pulling him closer and speaking in a tone dripping with manipulation. "Your brother doesn't want to help us, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling slightly for dramatic effect. "He has all this money, but he won't share it with his family. Doesn't that make you sad?" Jake frowned, looking at me with a mixture of hurt and betrayal. "Why won't you help us, Alex?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. This was low even for Rachel. Dragging a 5-year-old into this mess was beyond cruel. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting back the urge to scream. They weren't just attacking me anymore. They were using guilt as a weapon, twisting Jake's innocence against me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed despite the chaos swirling around me. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, though it carried an undertone of anger. "This isn't about fairness or helping anyone," I said, locking eyes with Madison first, then Rachel. "This money was set aside by my mom for me. It's not a piggy bank for you to dip into whenever it's convenient. My grandparents worked hard to protect it, and my mom made sure it would never be used to fund your problems." Madison scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, spare us the sob story. Your mom's dead, Alex. She's not here to care what you do with the money. Stop hiding behind her like she's some kind of excuse." Her words felt like a slap across the face, but I refused to let her see how much they stung. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "If my mom were alive," I shot back, my voice icy, "she'd be disgusted by the way you're all behaving. She didn't leave this money for you to take advantage of. It's mine, and I'm not giving it away." For a moment, the room fell silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching out endlessly. My dad stared at his plate, refusing to meet my gaze, while Rachel glared at me with barely concealed fury. Madison crossed her arms, her expression sour, and Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly overwhelmed by the tension. Even the air seemed heavier, charged with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. Finally, Rachel broke the silence, her voice cold and clipped. "Fine, Alex, if that's how you feel, then maybe you don't belong here anymore. Maybe you should find somewhere else to live if you're so determined to hoard all that money for yourself." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to push back. But I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape that echoed through the silent room. "I guess we'll see about that," I said evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind a scene that felt less like a family dinner and more like the aftermath of a battlefield. The days leading up to my 18th birthday were already suffocating, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened just a few nights before the big day. It started like any other evening. I came home from school, exhausted from trying to keep up with classes while navigating the emotional minefield that had become my life at home. The house was eerily quiet when I walked in, which should have been my first red flag. Normally, Rachel would be bustling around the kitchen or Jake would be giggling as he played with his toys. But tonight, silence, a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me the moment I stepped inside. I dropped my backpack by the door and headed toward the kitchen, half expecting to find everyone gathered there, pretending everything was normal. Instead, I saw a single envelope sitting on the table, my name scrawled across the front in handwriting I recognized all too well, my dad's. My stomach churned as I picked it up, the weight of the paper feeling heavier than it should. Something about the way it sat there, perfectly centered on the table, sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't just a casual note. This was deliberate, calculated. Whatever was inside, I knew it wouldn't be good. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Each word hit me like a punch to the gut. "Alex, I know we haven't been seeing eye to eye lately, but I want you to know that everything I've done has been for the family. I hope you'll reconsider your decision before it's too late. Rachel and I have discussed things, and if you're not willing to contribute to helping out your siblings, then maybe it's time you think about where you really want to live. Love, Dad." It took every ounce of self-control not to crumple the letter into a ball and throw it across the room. How dare he frame this ultimatum as some kind of loving advice? He wasn't asking me to reconsider, he was giving me an ultimatum: share the money, or leave. Those 4 words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. Think about where you really want to live. Translation: get out. Leave the only home I'd ever known because I refused to hand over money that wasn't theirs to begin with. For a moment, I stood frozen in the kitchen, clutching the letter so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then the anger gave way to something worse: despair. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the nearest chair, staring blankly at the words on the page. Was this really happening? Was my own father seriously choosing money over me, over a relationship? It felt surreal, like I'd stepped into some twisted alternate reality where nothing made sense anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of memories: my dad teaching me how to ride a bike, cheering me on during soccer games, hugging me after Mom died. And now, this cold, calculated betrayal. Around midnight, I finally broke down, sitting alone in my darkened room, tears streaming down my face. I let myself cry harder than I had in years. It wasn't just sadness, it was grief. Grief for the loss of the father I thought I knew, grief for the family I once believed in, grief for the future I'd imagined but now seemed impossible. But as the hours dragged on, something shifted inside me. Somewhere between the sobs and the silence, I realized I had a choice. I could either give in to their demands, sacrificing the one thing my mom and grandparents had worked so hard to protect, or I could stand firm and fight for what was rightfully mine. By morning, the decision was clear. I wouldn't back down, not for them, not for anyone. When the sun rose, I packed my bags quietly, folding clothes and stuffing essentials into a duffel bag. Every atom I placed inside felt symbolic, like I was packing away pieces of my old life to make room for something new. As I zipped up the last bag, I glanced around my room one final time: the posters on the walls, the books stacked neatly on my desk, the bed I'd slept in since I was 10. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was staying true to myself, to the legacy my mom left behind. Before leaving, I scribbled a quick note and left it on the kitchen table next to the empty envelope. Asterisk Dad, if this is who you are now, then fine. But don't expect me to come back until you realize what truly matters. This isn't just about money, it's about respect. Alex. Asterisk. As I walked out the door, dragging my suitcase behind me, I didn't look back. Part of me wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but another part of me felt free. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations. I was walking away not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let anyone take away what was mine. The day I decided to leave the house was one of the most surreal moments of my life. It wasn't just about packing a bag and walking out the door. It felt like I was stepping away from everything I had ever known, everything that had once been familiar. But before I could do that, there was one final confrontation looming ahead, one last showdown with the people who were supposed to be my family. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Nothing about this entire ordeal had been. Still, as I stood in the living room facing them, all four of them staring back at me, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of defiance and sorrow. This room, which used to echo with laughter during movie nights or holiday gatherings, now felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken accusations and unresolved tension. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was coming next. My dad sat on the couch, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles white from the pressure. Rachel stood near him, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line that screamed frustration. Madison leaned against the wall, her arms folded defensively, while Jake sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching his favorite action figure like it was some kind of shield against the storm brewing around him. They all looked at me, waiting for me to speak, but no one dared break the silence first. The air crackled with hostility, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, I found my voice. "Is this really what you think of me?" I asked, my tone calm but laced with bitterness. "Do you honestly believe I'm worth less than the money in that trust fund?" The question hung in the air, sharp and cutting, forcing everyone to confront the ugly truth they'd been avoiding. For a moment, no one responded. My dad shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet my gaze. He stared down at his lap, his shoulders slumped as though carrying the weight of the world. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Alex, it's not that simple." "Not that simple," I shot back, incredulous. "You've made it pretty clear where I stand. Either I give up the money or I don't belong here. Is that how it works?" Rachel stepped forward then, her face flushed with anger. "This isn't about the money," she snapped, her voice rising to a near shout. "It's about loyalty, about being part of a family. How can you sit there and act like you don't owe us anything when we've done so much for you?" Her words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her see how much they stung. Instead, I locked eyes with her, my expression unwavering. "Loyalty? You call this loyalty? Manipulating me, guilt-tripping me, threatening to kick me out of my own home? That's your idea of family? Don't insult me, Rachel. None of this is about loyalty. It's about greed. Plain and simple." Madison chose that moment to chime in, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're tearing us apart, Alex," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're selfish, and you don't care about anyone but yourself. You're ruining this family." Her accusation struck a nerve, but I didn't flinch. "Ruining the family," I repeated, my voice rising now, fueled by months of pent-up frustration. "Madison, open your eyes. This isn't about me ruining anything. Your mom and my dad are the ones who turned this into a war zone. They're the ones who decided that blood was worth less than dollars. And now you're standing here crying like I'm the villain. But guess what? I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't create this mess. You did. All of you." For a brief moment, the room fell silent again, the weight of my words sinking in. Madison wiped her tears furiously, her cheeks red with embarrassment and anger. Rachel glared at me, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might snap. Even little Jake looked up from his toy, his wide eyes filled with confusion as he watched the adults argue. Only my dad remained motionless, his head bowed as if unable to bear the sight of what his family had become. But I wasn't done yet. Turning back to my dad, I asked the question that had been burning inside me since this nightmare began. "Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging within me, "am I worth more than this money? Am I worth more than whatever plans you and Rachel have for Madison and Jake? Because if I truly mean something to you, then why does it feel like you're choosing them over me?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence spoke volumes, confirming everything I already suspected. To him, the money had become more important than our relationship, more important than me. With a heavy heart, I straightened my posture, looking each of them in the eye one last time. "Let me make one thing crystal clear," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "I don't owe any of you anything, not a single penny. This money was left to me by my mom and my grandparents because they wanted to protect me from situations exactly like this. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me. Not you, not Rachel, not Madison, no one." As I turned to walk away, the room erupted into chaos. Rachel shouted something unintelligible, her voice shrill and desperate. Madison sobbed louder, accusing me of being heartless, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. With every step toward the door, I felt a strange sense of liberation, a release from the chains that had bound me to their expectations. By the time I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt free. The days following my departure from home were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, all swirling together in a toxic storm that left me emotionally drained. I had moved in with my grandparents, seeking refuge from the chaos that had consumed my life. Their house was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe without the suffocating weight of Rachel's manipulations or my dad's ultimatums, but even there, the wounds ran deep. Every corner of their home reminded me of happier times when my mom was still alive, when family dinners weren't battlegrounds and trust wasn't something people weaponized. Then came the text message, a single line that shattered whatever fragile hope I'd clung to. It was from my dad, cold and unyielding. "Don't come back unless you're ready to share the money." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and hollow. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, reading the sentence over and over again, each repetition driving the dagger deeper into my heart. How could he do this? After everything we'd been through, after all the years he claimed to love me, how could he reduce our relationship to such a transactional demand? I collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down my face as the full weight of his betrayal sank in. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about loyalty, identity, and the very essence of what it meant to be a family. He wasn't asking, he was commanding, using guilt and abandonment as tools to force me into submission. For hours, I sat there, unable to move, unable to think clearly. My grandparents found me like that, curled up in a ball, sobbing uncontrollably. They didn't say much at first, just wrapped me in their arms and let me cry until I had no tears left. But the pain didn't end there. A week later, while scrolling through social media to distract myself from the turmoil inside, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Someone had tagged me in a post on Facebook, a lengthy rant written by none other than Rachel. The headline alone was enough to make my stomach churn. "When family turns strangers, the truth about greed and betrayal." My heart raced as I clicked on the link, dreading what I might find. The post painted me as the villain of the story, twisting facts and fabricating lies to justify their actions. According to Rachel, I was an entitled brat who refused to help my struggling siblings despite having more than enough to spare. She described Madison as a hard-working student whose dreams are being crushed and Jake as an innocent child robbed of his future because of my selfishness. There were even fake screenshots of conversations they allegedly had with me, filled with quotes I never said. Worst of all, she ended the post with a plea for sympathy, portraying herself and my dad as victims of my cruelty. My vision blurred with rage as I scrolled through the comments section. Friends and acquaintances alike piled on, calling me names like monster, selfish, and heartless. Some even suggested reporting me to authorities for neglecting my family responsibilities. It was surreal, almost laughable if it weren't so devastating. These people didn't know me, didn't understand the months of manipulation and emotional blackmail I'd endured. Yet here they were, quick to judge based on a carefully crafted narrative designed to vilify me. I wanted to scream, to defend myself against the avalanche of accusations, but I knew better than to engage. Arguing online would only give them more ammunition, more opportunities to twist my words and paint me as defensive or unstable. Instead, I turned to my grandparents for advice. Sitting around the kitchen table, I showed them the post, my hands shaking with fury. My grandpa's jaw tightened as he read it, his usual calm demeanor replaced by barely contained anger. My grandma gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "How dare they?" she whispered, her voice trembling with outrage. "They're desperate," my grandpa said finally, slamming his fist on the table. "This isn't about helping Madison or Jake, it's about saving face. They've backed themselves into a corner, and now they're trying to drag your name through the mud to justify their greed." He was right, of course. This wasn't justice, it was revenge. By tarnishing my reputation, they hoped to sway public opinion in their favor, to convince others that I was the bad guy and they were the martyrs. But I refused to let them win. With my grandparents' support, I drafted a private response to Rachel's post, addressed directly to those closest to her. In it, I explained the truth not to defend myself, but to expose the lies. I included details about the trust fund, emphasizing that it was set up by my mom and grandparents specifically to protect me from situations like this. I also shared screenshots of texts between my dad and me, showing his attempts to pressure me into giving up the money. Sending that message felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. It wasn't about vindication, it was about standing firm in the face of injustice. As the days passed, the backlash died down, though the scars remained. My relationship with my dad and Rachel was beyond repair, but I had gained something far more valuable: clarity. I realized that true strength lies not in holding on to grudges, but in refusing to let others define your worth. It was a few nights after my 18th birthday, and the weight of everything that had happened still lingered heavily in my chest. The house was quiet. My grandparents had gone to bed hours ago, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat on the couch staring blankly at the muted TV screen, replaying the past weeks in my mind like a broken record. Every argument, every betrayal, every cold glance felt fresh again, as if time itself refused to let me heal. Just when I thought sleep might finally claim me, my phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. The name flashing across the screen made my heart stop: Madison. Why was she calling me at midnight? For a moment, I debated ignoring it. After all, our last interaction hadn't exactly been friendly, more like a verbal sparring match where neither of us held back. But something about the late hour tugged at me, curiosity outweighing caution. With a deep breath, I answered, my voice guarded. "What do you want, Madison?" There was a long pause before she spoke, her tone uncharacteristically soft. "Alex, can we talk? Like, really talk?" Her voice wavered slightly, betraying vulnerability I'd never heard from her before. It threw me off balance. This wasn't the entitled, sharp-tongued Madison who'd accused me of ruining her dreams or sided with Rachel's manipulations. Something was different. "Okay," I said cautiously, sitting up straighter. "What's going on?" She sighed, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. Then, in a rush of words, she began pouring out her feelings. "I know I've been awful to you, Alex. And I'm not calling to ask for money, I swear. I need to say this." She paused, gathering herself. "You were right. About everything. You don't owe me anything. None of us. That money is yours, and no matter how much Mom pushed me or guilt-tripped me, I shouldn't have acted like I deserved it." Her confession hit me like a freight train. Not because I doubted her ability to admit fault, let's be honest. Madison rarely admitted she was wrong, but because hearing her say those words aloud carried so much weight. All those months of tension, resentment, and accusations boiled down to this fragile moment of honesty. "I've been selfish," she continued, her voice cracking now, "and stupid. I let Mom manipulate me into thinking I deserved part of your inheritance. I convinced myself that you owed me something because, well, because it was easier than facing the truth. College is expensive, yeah, but that doesn't give me the right to demand your future. I see that now. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of every cruel thing she'd said during our arguments. But another part, the bigger part, felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Beneath her bravado, Madison wasn't so different from me. She was scared, desperate, and caught in the same tangled web of expectations and greed that had torn our family apart. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "Not just for what I said to you, but for letting Mom pull the strings. I should have stood up to her, but I didn't. I was weak, and I hate myself for it." Her apology hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. I could hear the tears in her voice, and despite everything, it broke my heart a little. As angry as I'd been with Madison and Rachel, and even my dad, I couldn't deny that she was human too. Flawed, yes, but trying to make sense of a messed up situation. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally, my voice softer than I intended. "But Madison, you have to understand, it's not just about the money. This whole thing has been about control." Dad and Rachel tried to use guilt and manipulation to take something that wasn't theirs. And yeah, maybe they succeeded in tearing us apart for a while. But I'm done letting them dictate my life. She sniffled, composing herself. "I get it. Really, I do. And I'm sorry for being part of that. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight or ever, honestly. But I needed you to know that I regret how things turned out. I wish we could fix it." We both fell silent then, the enormity of the rift between us settling over the line like a heavy fog. Neither of us knew how to bridge the gap, or if it was even possible. But for the first time since the chaos began, I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, healing was within reach. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted quietly. "But I'm willing to try, if you are." Her response came quickly, almost eagerly. "I am. I really am." When we hung up, tears streaming down both our faces, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't instantaneous. It's messy, complicated, and painful. But sometimes, it starts with a single step, a midnight call, a heartfelt apology, a shared moment of vulnerability. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be rocky, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some scars could fade with time. The decision to move in with my grandparents wasn't just a practical choice, it was an act of survival. After everything that had transpired, staying under the same roof as my dad and Rachel felt like signing up for emotional warfare every single day. Their relentless attempts to manipulate me into giving up my inheritance had drained me emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. I needed space, a safe haven where I could breathe without feeling suffocated by their expectations and guilt trips. My grandparents' home became that sanctuary. Surrounded by their unwavering support, I began rebuilding my life piece by piece, determined to take control of my future. But even as I settled into this new chapter, the storm didn't subside. If anything, it grew fiercer. My dad and Rachel refused to let go of their obsession with the money. They bombarded me with emails and phone calls, each message more desperate and accusatory than the last. "You're destroying your family," one email read, dripping with venom. "How can you live with yourself knowing you've abandoned your siblings?" Another call came late at night, Rachel's voice trembling with rage. "Do you think this is over? We'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." Their tactics escalated beyond direct confrontation. They started targeting my friends. At first, it was subtle. A text here, a comment there, insinuating that I was selfish, ungrateful, and heartless. Then came the social media posts, carefully crafted narratives designed to paint me as the villain who hoarded wealth while my poor siblings suffered. Friends began questioning me, some awkwardly avoiding conversations altogether. It was infuriating, isolating, and utterly exhausting. Every accusation felt like another brick being added to the wall they were building between me and the world. I knew I couldn't fight back directly, not without risking further damage to my reputation or mental health. Instead, I turned to someone who could help me navigate this chaos, a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one recommended by my grandparents, someone known for dismantling manipulative schemes and protecting clients from predatory behavior. Sitting across from her during our initial meeting, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because I finally had someone on my side who understood the legal complexities of my situation. Apprehension because I realized how far my dad and Rachel were willing to go to get what they wanted. With her guidance, I took decisive action. First, we sent a formal cease and desist letter to both my dad and Rachel, warning them against any further attempts to harass me or tarnish my name. The tone was firm yet professional, leaving no room for misinterpretation. If they continue these actions, my lawyer explained, we'll have grounds to pursue legal action for defamation and harassment. Hearing those words gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting, I was taking charge. Cutting ties completely wasn't easy. Despite everything, part of me still clung to the hope that my dad would come to his senses, that he'd realize how much pain he was causing. But deep down, I knew that ship had sailed. His greed and Rachel's manipulation had consumed him entirely. When I officially informed him that I wouldn't respond to any further communication unless it went through my lawyer, his reaction was predictable. He accused me of being cold-hearted, of cutting him out of my life permanently. But I stood firm. This wasn't about punishment. It was about self-preservation. As weeks turned into months, the constant barrage of threats slowly dwindled. Whether it was fear of legal consequences or simply running out of ammunition, my dad and Rachel eventually retreated. The silence that followed was deafening but welcome. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on myself, on my dreams, my goals, my happiness. With the guidance of a financial advisor, I mapped out a plan for my inheritance, ensuring it would serve as a foundation for my future rather than a source of conflict. College applications, potential business ventures, travel plans, all of it suddenly seemed possible. Yet, amidst this newfound freedom, there remained a lingering ache. Losing my relationship with my dad wasn't something I could brush off easily. Memories of happier times haunted me, reminders of what once was and what could never be again. But with time, I learned to accept the loss not as a failure, but as a necessary step toward reclaiming my identity. I realized that true strength lies not in holding on to toxic relationships, but in recognizing when it's time to walk away. Today, as I look ahead, I feel a profound sense of clarity. Yes, I lost parts of my family along the way, but I gained something far more valuable: autonomy. This journey taught me that no amount of money is worth sacrificing your dignity, your values, or your peace of mind. And though the road ahead may still hold challenges, I face it with confidence, knowing that I'm finally living life on my own terms.